All right, folks, here we go. So we're moving on to section 8.6b. And with section 8.6b, what we're going to do is we're going to continue with the law of sine and cosine. So in this case, we're going to start with the law of cosine. We did law of sine in the last section of notes. And again, we have to break this down into two groups because it's just not recording everything if I go the whole length. So law of cosine is a very in detail and a lot of depth type of a thing here. So the reason you have to use the law of cosine is when you don't have an angle and a side opposite. If you don't have that, then you're going to have to use this. Anytime that we can use the law of sines, we want to use the law of sines. So again, as we go through these examples, this is a formula we're going to use, and the only reason it's different is just kind of show you, what we're trying to look at and what we're trying to find. Let's say, for example, we wanted to find side A, okay? Then we would actually use this equation here, and then the other two sides, again, order doesn't matter here, B or C first, B or C goes here, but I think of it as whatever you're trying to find goes on the outside. So if you're trying to find angle A, or you're trying to find side A, then the other one goes, those two things are on the outside of the entire equation. So hopefully that'll help you try to remember it a little bit. So again, this is only used when we can't use the law of sines. Only use this once. Once we can use the law of sines, let's use the law of sines. So you use this once, then you find that included side or angle, and then now we can go back into this is the law of sine that we used in the previous section of notes. So a lot of stuff here to use. You can just read through all this, and then let's get right into, the heart of one of these problems. So a lot of stuff here. I'm going to try to move some of this stuff out of the way. Hopefully you already read that, and then try to set up an equation for you. So if you look at this problem, hopefully you can see we have an angle. This is our angle, but you do not have the side opposite. That's the included side. So that's what we're trying to find. So flip back to your equation if you need to. Obviously, the stuff at the top is here to make sure that you know how to fill things in, the sketch and triangle and all that good stuff. So we want to find x squared, or x eventually, but the equation says we start with x squared. So x squared equals, and then it doesn't matter what you use, whether you go 11 squared or 25 squared, but that's what goes next. So let's say we went 11 squared, let's say we go plus 25 squared, and then the whole thing, and then we go minus this entire group. So this next group is 2 times the 11, put in the 25, and the cosine of the angle that we have. So that's the equation that we are going to use. So if you wondered where did I get that information from, the equation you can see right here is there. I just plugged that in. I'm going to move all that stuff out of the way now so I can show you how I would specifically solve this, because this isn't easy just because we got to this point. So what I like to do here is I like to work with the numbers that's outside of that cluster of stuff. So I'm going to start with the squared here. 11 squared, 121. The 25 squared is the 625. So I'm going to combine all of this stuff first, just because I like to have that nice and neat on that side. So that whole thing is 746. So that's x squared equals that. Now let's multiply all this stuff together. Now you can throw that all into a calculator. Remember, you have the minus sign, so you bring that down. You can throw that all into a calculator. I like to make sure, first of all, make sure you're in degree mode. Then I would go cosine of 45 and hit equals, just to get that part out of the way. Make sure that your calculator is working right. Then I kind of work backwards. I'm going to go times 25, times 11, times 2, and I'm going to hit equals. And that gives me a number that's about 388 point, a bunch of numbers, right? So I'm going to leave that in my calculator as is. I'm going to go 746 minus answer, and your calculator should have an answer button. And then that gives me, so I have my x squared, and that is about 357.09, and then a lot of numbers there. So the last step in our process is to now square root that. So again, I have that big long decimal, square root answer, so brings up that whole decimal, and then that gives me a final answer. So x is going to be about 18.9. About 18.9. So that is going to be your final answer. Now I'm just going to show you this to get ready for the next steps. But what we would do here is then we would go x is about 18.9. Okay? Now if we wanted to solve this triangle, which we're going to do later, but I just want to get that thought in your head, is now we would use the law of sines. Okay, so we would go the sine of 45 over the 18.9 equals the sine of z, let's say, over 25. So that's where we use the law of sines. Now what you have to realize is if you get this number wrong, then everything else will be wrong, because obviously you're using that number for the rest of the problem. So just kind of an introduction there. I know the hardest part is usually just setting it up, so that kind of shows you a walkthrough of what I did. You can look through that on your own. All right, so the next one here, oh, this one is the same one that we just did. Same process here. All right, so I want you to try this one here, and then I'm probably going to have to pause to make sure that the video is not too long. But again, we are trying to find, in this case, r. We want to find r. So here's r. Okay, so you can see they give us the angle. So now we need to set it up. We want r squared equals, and it doesn't matter what order you put this in, 15 squared plus 32 squared minus, you put this whole thing in a bracket, 2 times, then I go 15, 32 times the cosine of 40. This is the law of cosine of 40. Finish that bracket off for those of you that want to see that bracket. So again, that's how we set that up. Hopefully you can learn how to set that up. Now it's all calculator work. And again, with the calculator work, I'm going to, again, break this into parts. So I have my r squared, 15 squared, 225. 32 squared is 1024. I'm going to add those two together just because it's easy to do in my calculator. And that gives me 1249. Now I'm going to bring everything else down. Now I'm going to put that other stuff in my calculator. So I'm going to go cosine of 40. I'm going to hit equals just because I want to make sure I'm doing that right. Times 32 times 15 times 2. And I hit equals. I get a number that is about 735 point da da da. There's some stuff there. So then I go 1249 minus answer, and that gives me that r squared is about 513. And then obviously more numbers after that. How do I get that by itself? I square root it. So square root answer equals, and my answer is about 22.7. Okay, so that's what you're going to take a look at there. And then they only ask for that, so we're not going to continue from there. This one asks for the measure of angle P. So this one's going to be a little bit different because now they want to find an angle. So again, remember what I said. We're trying to find an angle or side. Whatever that is, we put on the outside. So what's going to go on the outside? The 2.9 is going to go on the outside because we're trying to find angle P. So now everything else goes on the inside. 1.3 squared plus 3.1 squared minus, and put that bracket here, 2 times the 1.3 times the 3.1 times the cosine of P. We're trying to find P. Now this is a little different because now we're trying to find an angle. So yeah, we're going to have to kind of change some things at the end and get to where we need to go. So again, 2.9 squared is 8.41. 1.3 squared, 1.69. You're going to add that to 3.1 squared, which is 9.61. And honestly, I'm going to add those two together. And that gives me 11.3. And I'm actually going to subtract that over. I'm going to subtract that over. So I'm going to subtract the 11.3 to both sides of, again, this is our equal sign. So I'm going to go 8.41 minus that answer, and I have a negative 2.89, and then it equals all of this stuff still. I'm going to bring all that down. So now I have a negative. I bring that negative down. I multiply those numbers in front of that cosine. So 2 times 1.3 times 3.1. And that gives me 8.06. So I have 8.06 times the cosine of P. So now what do we do in our equation? We're going to divide this by negative 8.06, divide by negative 8.06, and I'm going to have the cosine of P, and now I have a positive number. So I'm going to have the 2.89 divided by answer, and I get a big old decimal of about 0.35 and a lot of numbers after that. So then how do you get P by itself? You go the inverse cosine, shift or inverse cosine, answer equals, and my angle is about 69 degrees. Final answer is about 69 degrees. Hopefully this saves. Good job, folks.